Hey YouTube, what's going on? So in today's video tutorial, we're going to talk a little bit about the importance of bus processing and how it can make your mixes a lot fuller and a lot easier to work with. So what is a bus? Well, a bus is essentially just a channel that you send a whole bunch of audio to. And what I mean by that is, let's say, in this particular example, we're going to talk about drums. So I have a drum bus set up here, and in Ableton, you can literally just hold Control, click, and right click and click group tracks, or Control G for your shortcut. And it puts the tracks into a folder basically. So all of the audio that is in this drum bus here is pulling from these channels. So that we got the kick, we have a bunch of snare layers, we have some ghost snares, we got tops here, we have a little break that I chopped up, which comes in later, some rollers, some hats, all that fun stuff. So there's a whole bunch of different elements within this particular bus, and all of the audio is controlled by one fader in the bus here, this drum bus. So if I move this down or I move it up, every element that's in here moves up or down by that amount respectively. So yeah, in your workstation, you might not be able to group things like this, but what you can do is you can choose different outs. So you can route audio probably, like in this example here, I can choose to route audio out via one of these majiggers here, right? So you can do that in your workstation too. You just got to figure out how to do it, and it makes your life a hell of a lot easier. When you are able to put elements into buses, you can change the sound of all those elements at the same time, whether you want to EQ, compress, any of those fun things, reverb, delay, whatever. It does everything to every element in that bus. So yeah, let's get into it here. So what's going on in the drum bus? So basically, I haven't done too much treatment, I don't think, individually yet to any of these particular channels, but one advantage of bus processing is it glues everything together, and it can allow you to tame certain sounds. Like when you're working in electronic music and you're getting something ready for a master, you want to make sure that you don't have too many insane peaks going on, because during the mastering process, that the limiter that they'll introduce will have to work a hell of a lot harder when those peaks come up, and you won't be able to get your song as loud as commercial releases. So by grouping everything into buses, you can kind of control those. That's just one advantage, transients, before it goes off to the mastering engineer. So let's listen to this song quickly with and without the drum bus, okay? So I'm going to turn it off just to start. So with the drum bus processing there's a little bit more energy added, and everything kind of glues together a little more and sits with the mix. So let's take a look at the levels here. And one thing that's really interesting is if you're doing your job properly, you can get a lot of extra perceived volume out of like your drums without actually raising the peak level. So let's go again. I'm going to have it off, and we're going to look at the drum bus, and we're going to check out the peak level here. So about negative 5.87 dB. Now let's turn this on. So even though there hasn't really been much change, perceived change in the overall loudness. I mean, it sounds a little clearer and a little louder. We've actually brought the peaks down by about 3 decibels, which is pretty cool. So if we wanted to match exclusively based off of peak value, this is what it would sound like with the bus processing. Right, so that sounds a hell of a lot louder, punchier, better overall, right? And that's just because we've gone through a bunch of different processes here, and I'm gonna explain those to you. So first things first, I put some saturation on with this Black Box Analog Design plugin. You don't need this plugin, you know, there's lots of other great saturation plugins on the market, but this one in particular does a good job at raising, like adding a lot of harmonics to sounds, gluing things together, and making things sound a lot louder if you blend it in properly. So I'm going to turn all these off and go through the plugins here one at a time, and you'll hear the differences that they all make and how they all contribute. Right, so there's not a huge difference. It's a little bit subtle, but you can hear some of the high end is brought out. Some of the mids, especially around the snare, those are filled in a little bit. I made sure to retain the transients of the drums as much as I could, because when you're adding saturation like this, sometimes you can kind of squash the initial hits. So I wanted to make sure those still click through while adding a little bit of body. So then what we've got here is just a little bit of EQ around the 1K range to kind of make things sound a little clearer. There's a little bit of color that was added in from this Black Box that I kind of wanted to pull back on. So again, very subtle. Then I've got an effect rack here, and this is just a little bit of parallel compression to kind of, but beneath the drums, you essentially are blending in a small portion of a complete, like a compressed signal, and this can add some snappiness and energy depending on what type of sound you're going for. In this, I wanted the drums to be kind of hard hitting and have a lot of energy, so I've dialed everything in here, and you can see the mix is just barely on here because this thing does a lot of damage if you overcook it. So let's listen without and with. So that one in particular, you can hear in the high end, there's a little bit more energy that's brought in, and some of the main elements, the kick and the snare, they seem to punch just a little bit harder. Then I got a Pro Q3 that's just rolling off some of the lows here, and I'm probably going to change this from zero latency to linear phase at the end of this session when I actually finish it. It's a work in progress, but sometimes I've noticed if you're rolling off lows like this, even though it should theoretically be saving headroom, because you know there's a lot of stuff going on in the low end that doesn't need to be there, that isn't really heard by us humans. You can actually, if you look at your peaks on your meters, it actually gets louder, and that has something to do with the algorithm here. So when you change this to a linear phase, I honestly haven't done enough research on that subject, but I've noticed when you change it to linear phase, it cuts the low end, removes the stuff that you don't want, and it actually brings the overall volume down. So we got rid of that. And then I have this Saturn II in here, which I don't think is doing anything other than changing the dynamics. So I've pulled some of the dynamics in the lower mids and lows here down to make it snappier, and likewise up top. So if you listen to the snappiness of the drums before and after, you'll hear things get a little more clicky and cleaner when this is on. Right, so it kind of allows every element to breathe a little bit better. And then I've got a limiter at the end of the chain here, and basically what this is doing is it's just controlling any transients that are poking out. I think it's literally just the kick and snare that I'm probably controlling very, very minimally here, because you don't want to remove dynamics from your drums too much. You want to make sure that there's still variations between the loudest and the quietest parts. So let's take a look at what the limiter is doing. So basically what I did was I saw that things were peaking around -2 dB, -1.5, and I said, okay, I'm going to go for about 1.5 dBs of intense limiting here with this aggressive style. I brought the output down by 3, and I pushed the gain up 3 so that there's no, so that everything's level matched, but the overall, like the transients and the peak level stays fairly solid. Yeah, so that is the power of bus processing in your mix. It helps glue things together. It makes it a lot easier to balance levels after the fact, and I would highly recommend looking into it. So figure out how in your DAW you can do that bus processing and start experimenting with it. The fun never ends.